Okay, everybody, thank you for everybody who came in person this evening, and thank you to everybody who's online as well. I'm the moderator, I guess you could call it, for this evening. So I am going to introduce the three people who will do some speaking now in a second for this Rusted Bayley lecture, and one of them will be introducing the lecture for anybody who doesn't know what it is or why we're having it. So just for those people online, I'm going to monitor the chat, not the Q&A box. If you have a question that you'd like to ask the speaker when her lecture is over, so you can put your questions in the chat. I'll monitor that and I'll ask the question online with this microphone. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mark Berry. He's the department head for biochemistry. He'll be doing the land acknowledgement and coming back later to do an introduction of the speaker. Yes, okay. And then I'll let you introduce James. Okay, so I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Scott. So we acknowledge the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse indigenous groups, and we acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. So with that, I'd like to echo Scott's thanks for everybody who's come in person and those online, and I will now pass over to our brand new Dean of Science, Dr. James Gold, who will give some background on the Rusted Bayley lecture.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight. It is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Faculty of Science to the 2025 Faith Elizabeth Winifred Rusted Bayley Nutrition Lecture. It's been 3.5 weeks, roughly. So as your new dean, or as the new dean, this marks my first participation in this lecture series, and it's my honor to be here tonight. This lecture and the lecture series exemplifies the intersection that is critical between scientific research and community engagement. The Rusted Bayley Lecture, hosted by our Department of Biochemistry, stands as a testament to Memorial University's commitment to advancing knowledge in nutrition and health. Established through a bequest from Dr. Nigel Rusted in memory of his sister, Faith Elizabeth Winifred Rusted Bayley, a distinguished dietitian and RCAF squadron leader during the Second World War. This lecture series continues to inspire and inform our students, faculty, and community members. Tonight, we will hear from Professor Heather Keller, the Schlegel Research Chair of Nutrition and Aging at the University of Waterloo, and the Schlegel University of Waterloo Research Institute for Aging. Professor Keller is an internationally recognized expert in geriatric nutrition with a research focus on nutrition risk and malnutrition identification and treatment across various care settings. Her work has contributed significantly to improving nutrition care processes and promoting better mealtime experiences, particularly for those living with dementia. During this lecture, titled Nutrition, Cognition, and Living with Dementia, Professor Keller will explore the critical role of diet and nutrition in brain health. She will provide insights into strategies for managing eating challenges and enhancing the mealtime experience for individuals affected by dementia, a topic that resonates deeply with our aging population and their caregivers. Her work bridges clinical expertise with community engagement. Through programs like the Making the Most of Mealtimes initiative and the Fostering Dementia Inclusion Project, she helps to shift how we understand care, not just in medical terms, but in terms of dignity, agency, and inclusion. What's especially powerful about Professor Keller's work is that it doesn't just ask how we can help those living with dementia, it asks how we can learn from them, involve them, and ensure their voices are central to the research and policies that affect their lives. In a world where our population is aging rapidly and dementia diagnoses are becoming more common, this kind of work is more vital than ever. Tonight's lecture also reminds us that science isn't just about the lab. It's about people. It's about how research improves lives, especially when it's grounded in compassion and collaboration. And this is exactly why we are thrilled to welcome our distinguished guest speaker, Professor Heather Keller, to Memorial University. So, with that, I'll hand it back to you now.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, I don't think anything else needs to be said. So the floor is Heather's, and we'll be back to take questions at the end.
Sounds great. All right, so we'll just get the slides up, and then we'll be ready to go. While we're doing that, this is a public lecture, so it's less science and more application, just to be aware of. How many people in the room have had dementia in their lives in some shape or form? They've worked in dementia, they've had family members with dementia. Put your hands up. A good portion of you. So it's touching a lot of our lives. And so today we're going to be talking about some of the very practical things we can do to support people living with dementia in the community, and some of the challenges that often family caregivers and friends deal with. And so I just wanted to have my land acknowledgement too from the University of Waterloo and the Research Institute for Aging. So we're located on, oh sorry, university spelled wrong, sorry about that. We are on the traditional territory of the Arawandran, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, and the RA is situated on the Haldeman Tract, the land promised to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. So I'm hoping today to cover off these objectives. So talk about the importance of nutrition to cognition. Again, this is a public lecture, so there's not going to see a lot of biochemical stuff in here. You're going to see your practical recommendations. The essential elements of a nutrient-dense diet, because that's what we need to try to achieve. And quite frankly, there's lots of different diets out there. We'll talk about the similarities. They're really quite similar, and that's what we should be aiming for. How we support nutrition after diagnosis. So this is the unique bit that there's quite a bit of research before dementia and how to prevent dementia or delay the progression or delay onset of dementia, but there is very little research post-diagnosis. It's more about maybe some things on quality of life and well-being, but very little about nutrition. And so I'm a dietitian by training. I've always focused in on the very applied side of dietetics, and so you're going to get some of that flavor today. And then talking about eating challenges and effective strategies to support those in your care, and some of that comes from the research that I've done. So the importance of a high-quality diet. So no matter your age, we all know this as nutrition folks in the room, if you're interested in nutrition, your life stage or your health conditions, a high-quality, nutrient-dense diet is essential. I can remember when I had a leading member of the University of Waterloo, I had a research kitchen at one of the RA villages, and he came to see it. And he said, well, why is this so important for old people? And I said, are you kidding me? Your body continually needs nutrients. It's not just when you're growing, it constantly needs good nutrition. And so most of the populace doesn't realize the importance, I think, of nutrition to our overall health. And so that's hopefully, you already know that in the room if you're in biosciences and nutrition at MUN, but just to reinforce that for folks today. So every body system we have is continually needing nutrients. So it constantly needs that fuel, those nutrients to do those biochemical actions in the body. How our body functions will depend on what we eat. We've got people that are doing research in protein and muscle here, right? So we all know what you eat affects your function in your body. I've done a lot of work around the area of malnutrition, as was noted in the introduction. So we know malnutrition will lead to slow recovery in hospital and delayed discharge from hospital. Most people don't realize that. They think, oh, I went into hospital, lost 10 pounds. That's a good thing. No, it's not a good thing to lose weight when you're in hospital. It affects your function, chronic disease states. Many of the diseases we deal with and chronic diseases are managed by diet. So again, very important to have a high quality diet. And then what we eat can also help, as I said, recover from illness and surgery. So it's hugely important to have a high quality, nutrient dense diet to help us manage these things. So what is a nutrient-dense diet? Well, first off, it is a healthy brain. And so we're realizing more and more that the things that keep our body healthy, and specifically our cardiovascular healthy, also keep our brain healthy, okay? So some of the same sorts of hypotheses around how cardiovascular disease happens impact the brain as well. So what is a high-quality, nutrient-dense diet? Quite frankly, you guys know what this is, right? This is Canada's Food Guide, 2019. So nutrient-dense means more vitamins, minerals, and protein, and fewer calories, added fats, saturated fat, trans fats, sugars, and salt. And so this means whole foods versus processed foods. We won't talk so much about ultra-processed foods today, but the key idea is to have few ingredients in the food that you eat if it is a processed food. Of course, Canada's Food Guide, half a plate of vegetables and fruit, quarter plate as whole grains and a quarter plate as lean proteins, animal as well as plant-based proteins. So that's what a nutrient-dense diet looks like. And you'll see when we talk about the Brain Health Food Guide and some of the other diets that are appropriate for being very nutritious, they're very similar to this. It's the things you decide to emphasize in these diets that makes them slightly different. So again, at public lecture, you might not know how to read labels, but just a reminder that this is one good way to, when you're looking at packaged foods, to understand the nutrient density of the foods. So thinking about the things that are things you do want to de-emphasize, like saturated fat, for example, and things you might want to emphasize, and using the percent daily value as a way to give you a sense of what's in the food. I don't have the most up-to-date one here, but 15% or more, obviously, the food is a higher amount of that nutrient, and 5% or less means it has less of that nutrient. So some key recommendations when people, as I said, I'm a dietitian, I've worked with older adults for a long time, and they say, what should I be eating? What are the things I need to emphasize? Well, in general, the diet's very similar to a younger person, but there's some key nutrients we need to emphasize. Calcium being one of them. 1,200 milligrams a day for people over the age of 51 that are women, and over the age of 71 for men. And this is often, though, inadequate in our diets, right? And so we do our diet surveys in Canada, we do diet records, whatever it may be. We often see people not consuming anywhere near enough calcium in their diet at this age group. Vitamin D is another key nutrient, of course, that's really important for aging and for our body and bone health especially. The recommendation is 600 international units when a person is less than 70 years of age, and 800 international units when they're over 70 years of age. Again, often inadequate in diet. We need to supplement it typically, as Zahara can tell you. Relatively few foods that we consume, and she's been doing great research with her student. I don't know if her student's here, I don't see her. But so few foods in our diet have this. My dad, as a child, grew up having cod liver oil as a way to get vitamin D, right? We no longer take cod liver oil on a daily basis, but that's what he did. And I can remember even when he's into his 60s and 70s taking cod liver oil because he thought it kept his joints mobile. But we know it's more for your bones and bone health as well as other key things. We do have often an increased need for B12, but there isn't an increased recommendation. So the reason why we see a lot of older adults, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but 30% of older adults do not absorb B12 in the way they should, often because they're taking protein pump inhibitor or things that decrease gastric acid in their stomach. And so this can be low in people, and so we should be testing for it more than we are to identify a potential deficiency, especially as it's linked to cognition, right? So healthy diet patterns, what are they? And so you've heard of these, I'm sure, the Mediterranean diet, the MIND diet, the DASH diet. MIND diet is actually a combination of the Mediterranean and the DASH diet. DASH is for hypertension. Mediterranean, of course, is considered a high-quality, nutrient-dense diet worldwide and preventative in terms of many health conditions. Then Canada's Food Guide, as I already talked about, and the Brain Health Food Guide. Have you heard of the Brain Health Food Guide before? Oh, so this is a new one. Well, a couple people in dementia have heard of it. It's actually very similar to the other ones, but it actually emphasizes a few key foods that I want to highlight for you as well here today. But across these, there's a lot of similarity. And so this is why I said a high nutrient-dense diet is really what we need to aim for. You can have these different flavors, as I said, with Brain Health Food Guide or DASH or whatever. They're slightly different. But in general, they're very much a whole food, unprocessed diet. So what are some of the commonalities among these? And so where I've got servings here per day, this comes from the Brain Health Food Guide. So it's rather prescriptive as compared to the MIND diet or the Mediterranean diet, which is a pyramid, as you know. It's sort of a graphical presentation. And so on the right-hand side as well, you see some of the key things they want you to emphasize in the Brain Health Food Guide. And these are foods that have either phytochemicals or key nutrients that are beneficial in terms of brain health. So the Brain Health Food Guide actually came out of a group as part of CCNA, the Canadian Consortium of Neurodegenerative Aging. They created the Brain Health Food Guide. I was part of it eons ago. And Baycrest was the center, and Carol Greenwood was actually a big part behind this. And it was based on the evidence that had been published. It hasn't actually been tested from theory into practice. It's being tested right now in a pilot study called LEAD that's being conducted at the University of Waterloo by Laura Middleton. And so, but these are the key things that we're emphasizing. So when it comes to vegetables, you want lots of fruits and vegetables. And you're thinking, 5, that's a lot. But when we talk about serving sizes, you realize it's not as much as you think. But key ones to emphasize: leafy greens, Brussels sprouts, kale, those dark green vegetables, and cabbage, those cruciferous vegetables. They have some phytochemicals that are really important for brain health. Fruit, again, lots of fruits in your diet, but especially berries, a key component around, again, with phytochemicals that can support the brain health. Whole grains, you want 7 servings a day. And again, that seems like a lot, but when you see a serving size, it's not that big, actually. But again, it's whole grains, brown rice, whole grains, whole grain bread, etc. Low-fat dairy, about 2 servings a day. I suggest a little bit more of that to get enough calcium, quite frankly. You need about 4 servings a day to get enough calcium, that 1,200 milligrams. And there seems to be evidence to suggest that fermented dairy might be better for your brain than non-fermented dairy, so kefir and yogurt. Nuts and seeds, a small handful every day, specifically unsalted, and walnuts for your brain health. And then poultry, fish, eggs a few times a week, beans and legumes more commonly in the diet. So again, more of a plant-based diet, and fats and oils, typically olive oil and canola oil. We'll see the things you're supposed to limit in just a moment. So to show you here the serving size, I'm sure you've seen this as well. This is from Unlock Food Canada, Dietitian of Canada. Easy way to identify your food portions. So when we talked about 7+ grains, that's really pretty small. Pasta is half your fist size. So when you have a plate of pasta, you've got 4 servings there already, right? And so you don't need as much as you may think, and same thing with cereal, etc. Whole grain, often when I get asked this by older adults, they say, why eat brown bread? And well, it's not actually a whole grain. It's whole wheat flour, or it might be multigrain or enriched flour, but it's not actually a whole grain. And so you want to emphasize the whole grains, which has 16 grams or more per serving, and you should look for the symbol, as well as the types of things on the labels. The things that all of these diets say to avoid or limit are listed on this slide. So red meat, specifically pork, beef, lamb, processed meat as well has to be limited. Salt, under 2,300 milligrams per day, that comes from the DASH diet specifically. Sweets, it's not even on the list, which I find unfortunate because I think sweets should be part of a normal diet, but you're supposed to limit them. Pastries, pies, desserts, again, especially if they're commercially made, to be avoided because they might have more of the saturated fats in them. Butter and lard, again, avoiding totally, unfortunately. Cheese limiting to about once a day, and all these other foods as well to be avoided or limited as much as possible. When I show this to my students at university in the first year, they go, this is my diet. and it's kind of hard to realize that they're not eating a whole food diet, especially on campus. So another key, outside of calcium, vitamin D, and B12, we need to emphasize protein. And there's people in the audience that are protein experts, so this won't be anything new, of course, to you folks today. But many older adults don't realize that they need 50% more protein than the average adult. And that comes quite a surprise to them when they realize that this can impact their function and quality of life. So we need high-quality protein sources that include lean meat, poultry, fish, low-fat dairy products, eggs, and soy products. And a variety is the goal, not just animal-based products, but also plant-based products. There's quite a bit of research to suggest that this should be distributed throughout the day. 20 to 30 grams is usually the recommendation, and 1 to 1.5 grams per kilogram body weight. As people, of course, have more frailty or more challenges, then we're going to want to have a higher protein intake, of course, for those individuals. So, you guys in the room here, can you tell me which one would be the most efficient source of protein? So less calories, more protein. Which would it be? Give me one. You're thinking something. Nope. Sorry? Salmon. We got a person for salmon. Anybody any other suggestions? Quinoa is a suggestion. Okay. I got you guys whispering up there. You got a guess? Steak. So again, we're looking for the most protein, less calories, most efficient protein source. Protein researcher here. Chicken. Yeah. It is chicken. Yeah. Quinoa is a good plant-based source of protein, but doesn't have actually as much protein, right? And so this is a key thing about plant-based proteins. You have to have a lot more of it to get enough protein in your diet, right? And so the ratio is pretty low. So skinless chicken has very little fat and a few calories, and it gives a good punch of protein. So does steak, 26 grams of protein, but has more calories because of fat, right? Same thing with salmon. It's a fatty fish, right? And so certainly the green peas give you less calories and edamame as well, but also the protein is less, right? So this means you have to eat more plant-based proteins to get the same amount of punch of protein that you would get from an animal-based product. So if you look here at some of these are approximate values, of course. But again, looking at these, if I gave it as 20-gram portions, you'd see you'd have to have a lot more of things like the almonds and the peanut butter to get 20 grams, right? And then the calories are going to be higher then, which means you have to move more if you don't want to have any challenges with excess calories. So key ones that are good choices for vegetarians would be Greek-style yogurt, of course, a high amount of protein per relatively small portion. Edamame is pretty good too, right, as well as tofu. But a lot of vegetarians and vegans that I know that are students at university do not eat those foods, unfortunately, and so they're not getting enough protein in their diet. But you can see here as well some of the other key things that are animal-based are hard cheese and chicken and tuna. You're going to get that in pretty small portion size. So 3 ounces is about the size of your palm, okay, in terms of the size. Oils. I often get this question again from an audience that's interested in cognition because they've heard about coconut oil being really good for brain function. Well, the challenge is coconut oil is saturated fat. It's actually more saturated fat than butter. And so it's a bit of a myth, quite frankly, to say that coconut oil works for brain health, and there hasn't been any solid evidence behind that. But there's certainly lots of folks that have tried to look at it. What we do know is that saturated fat has the same sort of effect on the heart as it does on the brain, okay? And so if we know that the saturated fat is bad for your heart, it's also bad for your brain. And so you want to avoid those things that are high in saturated fat. But when we talk about the Mediterranean diet, for example, this is why I don't say we only have to eat olive oil, because actually avocado oil and canola oil and safflower are quite high in monounsaturated fats, right? And so there are other things as well in olive oil that are going to be beneficial potentially for the brain. But if you're focusing on the type of fat, you're looking for monounsaturated fat, which seems to be a large basis for why we might be benefiting from olive oil. There's other oils that are also quite good, and so which are less expensive. And so when thinking about food security for older adults specifically, we can think about other oils too. Hydration is another key area that older adults often do not drink enough. And in fact, we're just finishing up a study where we're validating a tool that I created called Screen. And almost everybody in that study, about 250 older adults living in a retirement home or living with dementia in the community, almost all of them don't consume anywhere near 8 cups a day of fluid, right? So it's really a significant problem. You think about hydration's needed for every system of our body, and so we need to have sufficient fluid. And so key would be thinking about drinking as a routine. And so as older adults, we need to think about carrying a water bottle around or using preferred cups and glasses and that sort of thing to support our nutrition. I often get asked as well about the idea of micronutrient supplements. So there isn't any evidence to this point for people post-diagnosis to have a micronutrient supplement or any kind of supplement that supports improving your brain health. It isn't consistent at this point in time. There are certainly some neurotropics that people are looking at, cocktails of vitamins and minerals that have been trialed, but it tends not to be, as I said, consistent, especially beyond a lab that's doing that work. And so we don't recommend at this point in time people post-diagnosis to be using anything specific in terms of neurotropics to delay progression. As well, individual micronutrients, often older adults get into the situation where they might say, oh, I need to take more vitamin K, or I need to take more vitamin D, and they get actually above the TUL, the tolerable upper intake level. And so we should be using them quite cautiously rather than as frequently. They're obviously provided in many drugstores and grocery stores over the counter, and people can take a lot of these things as a cocktail and can be quite challenging then in terms of potentially interacting with medications, but also getting to the point where they're above the TUL. A multivitamin for many older adults might be beneficial, and we certainly want to supplement if a deficiency is existing. And so if people are concerned about their food intake and nutrition as older adults, they should be testing for B12 as well as vitamin D for sure, and potentially iron, and trying to make sure they're getting enough of that. Calcium, we want to get as much as we can from the diet rather than through pills, but it's still recommended that if you're not meeting your 1,200 milligrams to go up to 500 milligrams a day for calcium supplementation. So I'm going to switch now to more thinking about post-diagnosis and the challenges we see with older adults living with dementia. And so unintentional weight loss is something that's very common with dementia, unfortunately. In no situation is unintentional weight loss good. It's always a bad thing. And so, again, thinking about people that go into a hospital and they have, maybe they went in for some sort of surgery and lost weight, they think it's a good thing. They say, oh, I finally lost 10 pounds. But they also came back more kyphotic and more frail than they were when they went into hospital, unfortunately. And so it's not a healthy thing. And so when people are living with dementia or their family members having dementia, watching what that weight is of the person can be very important to understanding their nutritional health. We know that chronically ill older adults have a poor response to stressors as well. And so having a bit of excess weight might be beneficial in terms of their overall health. People tend to get hospitalized and have acute illness when they've had weight loss in the community. Weight loss as well and inadequate food and fluid intake are very common as dementia progresses. And we see challenges then with individuals having these happen to them. And we'll talk about eating challenges in just a moment that we see in older adults living with dementia in the community. But what we do know from the literature is that weight loss actually demonstrates progression of the disease. And in fact, when people lose weight, the cognition gets worse, as well as the function of the person. And so you want to try to prevent that weight loss to try to delay some of those effects. So we also know that weight loss and malnutrition can increase caregiver burden. So this is a big issue then in community, when a large portion of older adults now living with dementia live in the community and being cared for by spousal caregivers or children. Trying to decrease that burden is a key thing to help sustain that arrangement. We also know as well now that caregivers are also at nutrition risk, many of them being spouses again, but also children. And so they're putting the needs of the care recipient first rather than thinking about their own health. And so we need to do work around caregiver training and education with respect to these areas as well. So what happens when we do see malnutrition with persons with dementia? Like in any other context, we see pressure injuries, infections, delirium, further cognitive impairment, fractures, hospitalizations, and caregiver burden. And so a decrease in the quality of life of individuals and their health status. So what are some strategies that we can put into place? Again, thinking about public audience, what would you think to put into place? So you have to figure out why they're not eating as well as they were in the past. Is it preferences have changed? Are they having challenges with thinking about the time that it is to eat? We're talking at supper time, a colleague having, to make meals for their parent because they can no longer do that. So you have to figure out what are the reasons why they're not eating. Is it the access issues? Is it lack of capacity to plan a diet and make the food at that time? You want to monitor their weight and fluid intake as well, food and fluid intake. And so trying to do that, especially if you're not living with the person, can be quite a challenge. You want to, if they're starting to lose weight, consume obviously calories in nutritious ways, nuts and cheese and higher fat dairy, and eat small amounts more frequently. Of course, talk to your physician, find out if there's any nutritional supplement that's needed, as well as talking to a dietitian. So we know that from a variety of studies that it sort of happens in a progressive way. And again, those of you that have had experience with dementia might have seen these things happening. So in the early stages of dementia, when people are living in the community, often pre-diagnosis, we start to see challenges with grocery shopping. They might forget how to use their PIN card, right? Or they might go to the grocery store and forget why they're there. And probably some of us think of it, we do that now. What does that mean? Why you went to the grocery store and what to buy. But from some of our work, for example, people would go and they'd buy 5 of something and they already had 5 of it at home, right? They're forgetting what they've had at home or what they need. They forget to eat. So forgetting to eat during the day, they just don't feel hungry. They have a reduced appetite often because as people age, they get more sarcopenic and their metabolic rate decreases, of course, and so their hunger decreases as well. Sensory changes happen with aging, but more progressively with older adults with dementia. The hypothalamus seems to atrophy, and that impacts their sense of a hunger and interest in eating, as well as smell. We see depression happening earlier on as well, and ability to adapt to changes. So thinking maybe they moved into a new environment, or they lost their spouse, and they don't have the same ability to adapt to those changes. So these often happen, as I said, before a person's even diagnosed. Then in the middle stages, where we start to see other changes happening, executive functioning changes happening, we see then some of these other factors coming out that impact food intake as well. Eating challenges, which we'll see in a moment, the prevalence of these. Preferences change. So for example, I can remember doing an interview with someone, they said, I made him his favorite meal. I said, I've never eaten that, right? I don't like that food. And maybe someone had that experience if you've had experience with dementia. So this adamant view that, no, I don't like that food at all. And so you can imagine as a caregiver, you've made what you think would be something they really enjoy, and they refuse it. Wayfaring, or going away from the table and walking away. Communication changes, not being able to be part of a conversation anymore, participate with the family at the meal and communicate in the same way that they had, and their attention changes. And then finally, late stages. Many people live in the community with these late stage changes, but many of the times they end up in moving into a care facility because they might have swallowing problems or dysphagia, refusal to eat, needing self-feeding help from others, and might not even be recognizing food, so eating things like napkins and things like that on the table. And that would be a late stage issue that we see. Weight loss is so common in dementia that it was actually part of the original syndrome when Alzheimer was actually coming up with his diagnostic criteria for Alzheimer's disease. Weight loss was one of those conditions. Now that we recognize weight loss as a part of the phenotype that happens with Alzheimer's, it isn't happening as much because we're putting services into place for these folks, recognizing earlier on that they do have dementia. So how prevalent are these challenges? This is very hard data to get, and so I'm hoping with the current study I'm doing in, as I said, a few hundred people in Waterloo area to update this value. This was actually a study, this is one of very few studies I've been able to find looking at people living in the community and what are their eating challenges. And this was in the States at a clinical environment, so going into a memory clinic type environment, right? So it's a very unique population. But swallowing difficulties, you can see, starting even in the early stages and almost half by the time late stage. And so it's not surprising then that you see many of the individuals who have dementia, what is the key thing they see near the end of life is dysphagia and aspiration, and you're getting aspiration pneumonia. This is compared to a no dementia group in the same clinical environment. Loss of appetite, again, is common. Appetite increasing, you might think that's rather odd, but hyperphagia is actually a well-known component of dementia. And they typically move out of that phase in the later stage, and then back to eating less. Food preferences change dramatically. Eating habits, this could be things like the way they eat food. They might have challenges using their hands with utensils. They might stir their drink and put things in their drink and that sort of thing. And then other behaviors as well noted. So it's quite common. And so you can imagine as a caregiver, you're providing care for some of the community. This is challenging then, right? You want to sit down and have a nice meal together, and these things happen. And it can be very challenging and frustrating for both the person with dementia and their caregiver. So what can we do to support some of these areas? And so this has come out of doing several years worth of qualitative interviews with older adults living with dementia and their caregivers. And we had the opportunity to interview them for 6 years. And they told us not only what the problems were, but what their personal strategies were. And that's been helpful because recognizing that every person with dementia is unique, right? And so, but it gives other ideas to other caregivers, what are some of the things they might be able to try. So for example, if the person's eating too much, you're really concerned about them choking, right? That's a key thing. But giving them more high fiber foods, more protein foods, satiating, drinking water before the meal to help fill them up, low-calorie snacks and side dishes being available around the house that they can graze on. That would be a way to deal with that. But if they're eating too much, the other key thing is eating quickly, small pieces to prevent choking. And so you don't want to give them a hot dog, for example, or things like that they might choke on, right? Especially if they're walking and eating at the same time. If they're feeling overwhelmed, simplifying the environment. So a calm environment, maybe some music on, or maybe not. Maybe music is distracting, TV off, keeping the conversation focused. Maybe they do better in a one-to-one situation rather than one with the whole family because it's too distracting for folks. And so thinking about some of these strategies you might try. People having challenges with kitchen appliances, using cue cards and instructions, or we have wonderful technology that shuts things off for us now, which is really great, right? So I think technology is really a potential way to help keep people in the community for as long as possible. In terms of some of the mealtime changes, so refusing to eat, some of this comes from long-term care work as well, but also from the community. So think about why are they refusing to eat? Are we actually, if we're assisting them, is it because we're feeding them too quickly? Is it a texture they don't like? What are those challenges that we have with that? Give them their favorite foods as well. Do they use their hands? Well, then make all food finger food. Everything can be finger food. Everybody who's raised a kid knows all food is finger food, right? So don't worry about it if they eat their salad with their fingers. It's still getting in, right? Seeing food on the plate, maybe contrast plates. So I've done some research. We looked at blue plates versus white plates. And in our study, there was some original work done, and they had taken 9 men who had challenges with eating, and they put them outside of the dining room and gave them blue plates versus white plates versus red plates. And they saw improved food intake with the colored plates. However, we did ours in the dining room to see if that, because that's the real environment, right, where they're eating in the actual dining room. And we found that only about a quarter of people were responsive to the actual color change in the plate. So it's not every person with dementia that responds to that change to help support their food intake. Lack of interest. So thinking about if a person's on modified texture foods, for example, making the food look good, and so we do this quite a bit in long-term care, is molding the food, or thinking about social facilitation. There's some work that looks at mimicry. So if you ever notice when you're on Zoom calls and someone's got a coffee cup and they drink, and you've got your water, you're more likely to drink, right? And that's mimicry. And so you can use that as well with a person with dementia, that if you're eating with them and you're eating as well, they're more likely to eat better. And so this is one of the things we think about for care environments, having staff eating with residents as well. So when eating with someone with memory problems, becomes really challenging. So what do we think about? We talked about this for some of you that were there yesterday. I had a lecture as well, a seminar in the department. But we want to try to promote the mealtime experience for both the caregiver and the person living with dementia. And we know that from the work that we've done that's theoretical around the idea of what is important to mealtimes, it's about promoting connections, supporting identity, and helping people to cope. And so some quotes here to just give you a sense of the importance of some of these things with respect to mealtimes. I'll let you read that for a moment. So mealtimes are beyond the food, right? Certainly nutrition's hugely important to cognitive health and overall health, but the mealtime experience is also very important. So how can we support that for people living with dementia as well as their care partners? And so how can we support connecting? Again, this comes from the Eating Together study, which was a 6-year longitudinal study of people in the community living with dementia. And so finding that dedicated time, meals provide that for folks, right? You eat 3 times a day. Usually, if we're doing it well, we're sitting down and not playing games and not watching TV and talking to other people, right? Having that social connection. So it's a time for dedication, right? So if you can imagine you're a caregiver and a person with dementia, this is a key time for connection to happen rather than using other opportunities, because food is a natural connecting point. We go out for interviews with people, we go out for lunch. I've been here for the last 2 days and going to various lunches to meet people. You do that over food, right? It's this natural social thing that helps us connect. When people are eating, there's less pressure to talk. So if a person has challenges being part of the conversation, they can still feel they're participating by listening, right? And so that's a key thing. They still feel part of the group when they're having some challenges. You want a calm environment, and making the meals an important ritual. So think about, again, at home, if you're having these challenges with a person living with dementia, how can you make the mealtime a special time rather than a rush time that might be impacting their food intake? Use things like conversation aids. So one of our families that was in the Eating Together study, they had a large group of children, I think 6 or so, I can't remember exactly how many. But what they would do, one Christmas, they decided to help their mom who was having challenges talk to her husband who had dementia at mealtimes. They would put conversation aids together. So they took memories and wrote them down on pieces of paper, and they gave them to them for Christmas in a box. And she put them in a fishbowl, and every supper time, he would draw one out of the fishbowl, and they would use that as a conversation aid. So now they had something to talk about. They were in the house all day long, and if anybody's been in the house all day long with their partner, during COVID, you remember how hard it was to find things to talk about, right? So same idea, people are living spousally in a home and around each other all day, having a hard time figuring out what to talk about, especially if the person has dementia and has challenges with listening to news and things like that. So using those sorts of conversation aids could be really helpful to keeping the connection going within the family. When you go have a group of people, summarize the conversation. So they might have forgotten the people's names that are at the table, or they might not be following what's going on in terms of story, and they want to interject something, helping them remind them what's going on in the conversation to help summarize it so they can be part of it. And then finally, rehearsing names. I do this already with my spouse. It's like, we're going to see these people, and what's their names again before we go, so they don't feel embarrassed because they don't remember who folks are. So I'm going to let you read these quotes now. And it gives a sense of identity. So meals are important routines and roles in families. Who's the cook in their family, or in your situation where you live now? Who's cooking? Yeah, yeah. You might not think of it as a meaningful role, but it is, right? And so when you lose that, you lose some sense of importance, right? And so, for example, if the person with dementia was, I'll give you a concrete example. We've been running this program called Cooking Together, which is university-aged youth cooking with persons with cognitive changes. One of the ladies we had in our program that just finished, her husband had been taking over all the cooking when she was diagnosed with dementia. And their habit had been to be cooking alone. I've never cooked together. And my PhD student was doing interviews with them last week, and she told me this wonderful story. She said, you know, now Philip, I don't know what his name is, Philip, because she's been in this Cooking Together program, now realizes she can be part of this with him. They don't have to actually do it separately. And they were seeing it as a way to do things differently, not taking over the role that she had had in the past. So it's kind of interesting to think about how this could be supportive of people with living with dementia. So these things are meaningful to individuals, right? So thinking about cutting the vegetables, give someone meaning in the house so they feel like they're contributing, or being part of the grocery shopping, or part of the setting the table, those sorts of things. You want to try to encourage people to be part of this as long as possible when they're living at home. You can share the tests and be flexible about them in the moment, realizing what the person needs. Because dementia, my mom has dementia, she lives in long-term care. I visited her for about 3 hours last Saturday. Within that time span, she forgot who I was, probably 5 times, and also remembered who I was. So it goes up and down and up and down and up and down. It's not consistent. So you have to think about, you know, yesterday he could cut the vegetables and today he can't. Well, today he can wash the vegetables, right? And so thinking about how to keep the person involved. The key is being together. Because meal times are a natural way to connect. Again, not just the eating of the food and talking, but being together in the kitchen, co-producing something together is very meaningful for people. You want to keep traditions that are unique to the family and individuals. So one of the eating together participants, again, the mother was an amazing cook as she had dementia, and the husband was totally useless in the kitchen, but their daughter lived right behind them. And slowly over time, the daughter took on more and more of the traditional meals, like they get together for Easter or Christmas or whatever it was. And rather than the mother feeling like that role is being taken over, they talked about what she would do that was really important still to the meal. So she went from cooking the whole meal to now making these amazing vegetables or amazing salad, something that didn't have to be timed in the oven, that had to take, you know, that sort of thing, lots of quality control. She could do that. And she took a lot of pride in that because she could do this amazing vegetable dish or this amazing salad. And so keeping those traditions are really important. But the key thing here is protecting dignity. And so anybody who's worked with older adults, this is what you want to do. You don't want to be objectifying. You don't want to be infantilizing. You want to protect these people's dignity. They are people with amazing paths, amazing careers, and how to encourage that, right? And how to support that. So whatever you do, try to protect their dignity, is that one quote here identified, right? So when people have advanced dementia, especially living at home, it can become even more challenging for family members. So we're talking now about those things like swallowing problems, not even recognizing food, not knowing how to feed themselves anymore, right? And so how can we try to work on this? And so with caregivers, they get very, very anxious when the person stops eating or eating as much. And I can remember when my kid was 1.5 or so, and I worked with a pediatric dietitian, and Eden's food intake dropped off at about 18 months. She said, oh, that's normal. All kids do that. But you can imagine if I want to take over that control and start feeding her, that would change our relationship. that control thing, right? It's the same thing here. So think about the relationship that is most important here, not necessarily the food intake, especially as they're moving towards the end of life. We're expecting that change to happen. So remember that feeling pleasure, companionship, and belonging is really more important than how much is consumed. And so that gets caregivers off the hook when they realize it's not so much did he eat his peas, meat, and potatoes, did he enjoy the meal, right? And it gives them a sense then of, this is still a meaningful opportunity. Don't take food refusal personally. And so a lot of family members do. They say, I made this wonderful meal and he walked away. And you feel like a useless caregiver when that happens. I see people nodding in the audience who've had that experience, right? Don't take it personally. This happens with dementia. Rather, focus in on the relationship. Again, what's important is the relationship. So maybe he'll come back for dessert and he can enjoy dessert with coffee, right? That's probably the key thing we want to emphasize here. Swallowing problems become very common. In fact, I had a doctoral student look at people living in long-term care the last 6 months of their life, and 80% of them had dysphagia before they died, right? So it's extremely common near the end of life. So it's to be expected. So as family members and caregivers, realizing this is common, and then how to address that in a positive way and proactive way, and also realize that this might be nearing the end and accepting that. Loss of interest in eating and drinking is extremely common as well near the end of life. So recognizing, again, this is what's happening, rather than pushing it on the person, because that, again, can lead to a lot of resistance, guilt on the part of caregivers, and you see a lot of conflict happening as well at that point in time. So we recommend when we do our end-of-life training with staff and family members, is let the care recipient lead. If they feel hungry, eat. Wonderful. If they don't, eat a cookie with them maybe and just don't worry about it, right? That's the key thing, keeping the relationship, because that's what's essential. But near the end, food won't be consumed anymore. Think about, when we're all born, the first thing we do is breathe, right? And our heart beats, right? And then we eat. Well, guess what? You're going to eat, stop eating. Eventually, you'll stop. Your heart will stop and your breath will stop, right? And so eating will stop. And to be aware of that, that's part of the natural progression. So I'm part of a group of researchers at the University of Waterloo who've created a variety of resources meant for community folks, and specifically people that are not healthcare providers, service providers, so running congregate day programs, running exercise programs in the community. And we've created this one website that has 3 different projects in it and all the resources, and they're widely available for anybody to use. The DREAM project specifically is focused in on training service providers around dementia inclusion in programming in the community, which is necessary because folks live with dementia. They often feel a lot of stigma to be part of activities and community events, and how to support them to be included. That's really important. They have a right to be included. Additionally, we have in the DREAM website specifically nutrition, as well as physical activity, guidance on how to run physical activity programs if you've got people with dementia in your program, or with respect to meal programs, things to think about. So we've got to talk to them about the Brain Health Food Guide, the importance of eating together, which I've emphasized to you today as well. The Delight program, I'll tell you a little bit about that. We'll see some slides in just a moment around some of the resources. We're still in the discovery phase, if you will, or research phase of this, so I didn't have any research to show you specifically on it. But this is a program that's 8 weeks in length, where we do exercise, nutrition, and well-being with older adults living with dementia and their caregivers. And they come for 8 weeks. They stay for an hour and a half, 50 minutes of exercise, and then about a half hour or so, they sit together and they chat, and they do peer support, quite frankly, but a guide also, the leader also talks about key topics, like it might be how to have exercise in your daily life, or how to have more berries, that sort of thing. We've created fact sheets and support sheets for all of this sort of thing, stress management, sleeping well, that sort of thing. And so Delight right now, we did a couple of pilots, one virtual during COVID and in person after that. And now it's actually been funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada to adapt it to different cultural groups. And so we have an Indigenous group, we have a Chinese group, we have a South Asian group, and we have a group in Nova Scotia. They're more of Caucasian, but we're doing it a little bit differently. And Saskatchewan's a totally virtual group, how to do that over the phone, actually, not even over Zoom. So it's kind of intriguing. So those are some of the programs there, and as I said, all of the resources are available. So this would be, for example, the participant guide for Delight, and it shows you some of the key things. So we have, for example, this is a 2-page fact sheet on hydration. So very basic focused information that will help caregivers and persons with dementia to think about some of these issues to support their nutrition. So, again, if you are concerned at all about nutrition in an older adult with dementia, key is to watch for weight loss, poor appetite, and eating challenges, especially swallowing problems. And if you're looking for a dietitian, to go to Dietitians Canada as a way to find that person. So to wrap up, hopefully you got a sense today that eating and nutrition is really important to optimal aging and optimal brain health. And I've given you some of the key things you should be emphasizing, some of the key nutrients and healthy eating patterns. And then specific issues with dementia and tips we should be thinking about in terms of, and these again based on evidence with people living with dementia and what things they've tried to try to manage some of the challenges they're living with dementia. So with that, I'll stop there. So thank you very much. So we can, if you're interested in knowing more about the RA, I can also answer questions about that because it's quite a fascinating place. We've got a question at the back.
Thank you, Heather. There's a question up at the back. Do you want a microphone up there?
And just a reminder for those online.
Yeah, I've already checked it. Yeah.
If you have any questions or comments, drop them in the text, and Dr. Harding will be your in-person voice.
Thank you very much for that beautiful lecture. I have 10 questions.
10 questions?
Yeah, but...
you might have to talk out there afterwards over water or something.
I'll only ask two then.
Okay.
Okay. My first question is, what is your expert opinion on the link between moderate consumption of red wine and reduced dementia risk?
Yeah. So certainly moderate use of wine was proposed to be beneficial for cardiovascular health. And if we think of the same mechanisms are happening in the brain, it would be there for the brain as well. The challenge is they realized that those epi studies were poorly, I shouldn't say poorly connected, but the way they identified the exposure was not the best way. And so I think it was 2019 or so, Stockwell wrote a really good paper and review paper to show that the issues were they put the non-consumers with the low consumers. When people could be not consuming because of chronic disease, which often happens, older adults stop drinking alcohol or are told to stop drinking alcohol to avoid situations with that alcohol and their chronic disease. So by putting people with no or abstinence together with low consumers, they actually picked up the chronic disease piece. And so it looked like this J-shaped curve, when really it's not like that. And so now when you actually separate that group out, the low consumers don't have a benefit, okay? And so there isn't that sort of benefit from being low consumers, all right? And so that's a key thing is the way that we've done the EPI. And so as you know, I think it was last year, 2 years ago, last year, they came out with new recommendations that any amount of alcohol is not good, right? It's a toxin, right? It's a toxin to the brain. We know it has effects to the brain, so it's not of benefit to have that little bit of red wine. My dad was a teetotaler, which means he doesn't drink at all, but he was in a cognition study when he was in his 70s and told to drink wine. He drank this little thimble of wine daily, faithfully. Didn't help, but anyway, yeah.
I'll throw my red wine away. Thank you. Okay. Okay. My second question is, what are the biomarkers that can serve as early indicators of nutrition-related cognitive decline?
Sorry, I didn't get the first part of that.
What are the biomarkers that can serve as early indicators of nutrition-related cognitive decline?
Biomarkers. I don't know. Do you know? I'm not aware of any. Certainly they're looking at a variety of things, you know, in terms of, but I'm not a brain biochemical expert by any means. Certainly they've come out with some serum markers around identifying risk for Alzheimer's disease, but I'm not sure of any nutrition biomarkers specifically that are associated with it. Perhaps somebody in the audience might have that. The biochemists here might have that knowledge, then I don't. Yeah. Okay. Other questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
Okay. I can understand that when people become older, we have a lower eating capacity, loss of appetite, but the relation between the swallowing problem and then the dementia is kind of I cannot kind of
Understand why that happens?
understand why this happened. Do you?
Yeah. Yeah, we don't really know for sure either, but certainly there's some folks that are doing work that think it might be sarcopenia, and so we see something called predysphagia in older adults. It starts, in your 50s. Anybody near their 50s might have noticed as you choke more on water, or even just your saliva, quite frankly, when you're talking, and that's called predysphagia. And it might be linked to aging processes that are linked to nerve changes or sarcopenia, quite frankly, in these structures of the body. But why dementia specifically? Is it the changes in the brain that are leading to changes in the innervation in that area? Is it a lack of concentration? Certainly swallowing, the first part of the swallow is under our control, right? And so if someone is lacking that cognitive capacity, even though it's pretty autonomic to us, it is to your control until it gets to your pharynx. And then it becomes automatic, right? So is there some lack, because of cognition, lack of control and awareness of what's going on in the mouth? Okay, that could be part of it. Why, though, a pharyngeal swallow gets discoordinated? I think it is more the physiological changes, quite frankly, that happen with aging. And we can put that down again to changes in nerve function and muscle. And that is, I think it's more common because people often with dementia near the end of life are malnourished. And so we see sarcopenia and malnutrition being highly associated, right, in this group. And so that's probably why we see it. Yeah.
Thank you.
I can go on about long-term care and people laying in beds as well, and that might be reasons why they aspirate too. But anyway, yeah, go ahead.
I was just wondering if you noticed a big difference in the weight loss between someone who is being cared for in the community, like by a loved one, or in like a long-term care home?
We don't know that. And this is why I said the research post-diagnosis is very poor. And so based on my clinical experience, you'll often see people who, if they were living alone at home, going into a community, a congregate setting like that, now you've taken care of the access issues. They gain weight, right? And some people I've seen get hyperphagia, and the family goes, they're eating everything, they're all out of their clothes, I have to buy new clothes. And I say, don't worry about it, because eventually you'll go the other way again, right? And so we don't have enough research in the community at all. This study that I'm doing right now is one of the few that have been done looking broadly at nutritional status of people. We're validating a screening tool. We're doing a full nutrition assessment of people. So it's really quite unique. There's very little data, unfortunately. Yeah.
I was wondering if there was other studies like globally that assessed the dementia prevalence in different countries,
absolutely.
and if you're using some of those dietary patterns to assess what's best to reduce.
Well, it's interesting that dementia is most rapidly growing in developing countries. It's growing rapidly in developing countries. So we think often, well, developing countries might have a better diet, but often there's other challenges in those diets as well. Lack of micronutrients, for example, lack of protein. And so it's worldwide. We're seeing this prevalence go up for sure. The challenge, of course, is a diagnostic bias as well. So finding people with dementia in Canada, right? We think, the prevalence is higher here than it is somewhere else, right? And so that's a big part of epidemiology, is the diagnostic bias issue, right? But we do know worldwide it is growing, and not only in developed countries, but also in developing countries, in middle-income countries, low-income countries as well. It's rapidly increasing. So there is something, beyond just, our Western diet, but many of these low-income countries might have low protein, they might have low micronutrients and other things as well. Yeah.
Thanks for the presentation. So you talk about the effect of healthy diet and good diet on dementia, and basically it's important to take the nutrients we need.
Yep.
But is there, does taking different supplements rather than the food itself, does it gonna have different effect on dementia, or?
Yeah, there's some evidence around omega-3 being beneficial for brain health, right? But as I said, there's this group that have done this cocktail of micronutrients, and it seems to be only their lab being able to show it. And they're rather proprietary about this stuff, and they've got B12 and folate and lots of micronutrients in there. And they seem to have shown some minor changes, but it's in very early stage dementia and only on some of the cognitive testing, so not all of it. And so it's really, really limited. And to think that, by the time someone shows cognitive changes diagnosed, you've got a lot of neurotangles and tau in your brain, right? And you have been the neuroplasticity isn't overcoming that, I think, by that time with neurotropics. So this is why there's so much emphasis, prevention of dementia and thinking about diet rather than post-dementia, because a lot of people think, well, once you've got these tangles, et cetera, you're pretty much, you can't reverse it. You can slow it down, I think, and weight loss is one of the key things that we've seen, that if people maintain their weight for whatever reason, is it because they're eating well, they're exercising, whatever it may be, they tend to have a slower progression, or is it just confounding? The more they progress, the more they lose weight. We don't know that. Again, the evidence, unfortunately, is quite sparse. There's certainly evidence around weight and showing people use, as I said, some of the early studies that looked at Alzheimer's, and they actually coined Alzheimer's the phenotype weight loss. There's some studies in the 80s or so showing that the prodromal sort of dementia, everybody lost weight. But now, 20, 30 years later, we're not seeing that same dramatic weight loss happening before diagnosis, because we're recognizing, these other access issues are part of the challenge, and fixing those as services for folks. So, preventive-wise, maybe omega-3s. I'm not an expert in omega-3s. Someone is in this room, I'm sure, but I'm not. And Sukhinder can tell us, is omega-3 pills a good idea to be taking? Certainly fish oils, fish is part of the Mediterranean diet, part of the Mind diet, part of the Brain Health Food Guide, to emphasize, and this is a great fish eating culture I've learned over the last 2 days, for sure. Had fish at every meal, which is amazing. But that seems to be a benefit from the epi studies. But the clinical trials just don't seem to pan out with some of these micronutrients, unfortunately. So it seems to be the pattern of eating.
I've got a question online from Alison Gesso. She wants to know, would the Mind diet be recommended for the elderly population to help prevent cognitive decline? Is there a certain age that has been shown to be beneficial for adherence to this diet?
Oh, okay. I don't know about an age, but certainly the Mind diet has quite a bit of evidence behind it with respect to preventing dementia. Again, the Mind diet was based on an epidemiological study originally, and they looked at, these are the factors that seem to prevent dementia, and then they put them together and called them Mind diet, and they realized it was DASH diet and Mediterranean diet principles together. And there seems to be evidence to suggest that it does slow the progression or the development of dementia. We don't have evidence post-diagnosis, unfortunately, but why would we think the brain's any different post-diagnosis to the benefits of the diet? So that's why we support it still, for that reason.
I've had another question online from Nancy Penton. What techniques would you recommend for those who, with pierced lips, when trying to be fed?
That's an interesting question. Well, making sure you don't get caught on the spoon, I suppose. But I've never had that question before. I guess I would ask the question: do they bite on the spoon as well? Because that's more the concern. Is so they bite on the spoon, they can hurt their teeth or break their teeth, and we don't want to use often plastic spoons because they break them off and chew them and swallow them in long-term care. So we tend to use small spoons. I've never had that question before.
Actually, I might have misread it. It says, for those who pierce lips when trying to be fed.
Okay. Purse their lips. Purse the lips.
Sorry, it was an autocorrect, I think. Yeah.
Now
refusing to eat. Yeah.
No, now I get it. I've never had pierced lips before. We
Sorry,
don't
Nancy. I think that might have been an autocorrect.
Anyway,
you're fired.
Purse their lips, absolutely. And so this is where mimicry might be useful. So if the person does have their eyes open, this is something you see in advanced dementia. People refuse to eat. So they turn away from the spoon or they clamp down. They don't know how to open their mouth anymore sometimes. And so the challenge is how to trigger those normative actions for them. And so sometimes if they can hold something, like maybe it's a cookie or something, that, I'm holding it, I can try it. That's one thing they can try. Or mimicry, if they get their eyes open, you eat something and see if they'll open their mouth then. You don't want to sit there, though, and pry their mouth open with a spoon. That's basically, one, they might be not wanting to eat, and two, that's not very dignified, right? So you have to think about other ways to do it. And maybe it's starting with a drink that usually will help. Maybe they feel like they are thirsty instead of hungry. But this is an end-stage dementia condition that we see a lot. And it's very frustrating for formal caregivers and family members. We did a study, the M3 study. We actually looked at caregivers who were the staff versus residents, compared to family on the same residence. And we looked at the meal intake, how much they ate when they were with their family versus when they were with staff. They ate more with family. So there's something about the social connection that can support food intake. And so that's what I would suggest, someone's pursing their lips, maybe they're not ready right that moment, give them a bit of time, relax, maybe try something else, holding something, eating with them. Those might support getting interested in eating.
I'll just follow up with my own question then. So in terms of mimicry in long-term care settings, have you seen any long-term care settings in Ontario that actually staff will do that? Because I've not seen it here from personal experience.
Because they're not allowed to, right? But I've seen staff do it covertly because they know this is what's going to help the person. And so you'll hear staff say, she wouldn't eat anything, but I brought in a peanut butter sandwich and showed it to her, and she wouldn't look at it. I ate one half, she started eating the other half. So it does happen covertly, but we need to get past some of the rules that we have around food safety and staff and what they do, and have staff sitting at the table drinking a coffee, right? Why not? I don't know why we have these rules around this. And I remember talking to a food safety colleague. She said, anything you want to do, food safety would say you can't do it in long-term care, quite frankly. So we have to move past that and realize that the relationship is more important. Some of these, this is their home, right? And the staff that are there should be able to do some of these things to support the relationship. And that would be one of them, eating with folks, right? Yeah.
Hi, it's me again.
Okay. Number 3.
Number 3.
Number 3.
Okay. Can we personalize nutrition based on genetic profiles in order to effectively manage dementia?
I don't think we have enough evidence to this point. Certainly, people are doing personalized medicine for a variety of other things. I think, again, preventive, perhaps. And there is a guy out in California that's been doing that, taking a biochemical sort of view of people's health and then thinking about what nutritionally they should be eating. Does it actually stop progression? I haven't seen the evidence yet. Okay? So there's some interest certainly looking at that sort of genetic influence and see if that helps or not. Again, I suspect post-diagnosis, you've got so much tangles and tau going on that that's not going to be a benefit to you, right? So it's going to be on the preventative side of things, and so there is some people doing a little bit of work in that area. Haven't seen the evidence in a solid way. I've seen some stuff put in pretty poorly rated journals and very poor science put out there, but it's not good science at this point.
Do you see, and I'm pretty sure I know what the answer to this is going to be, do you see the same sort of progression with, for example, early onset Alzheimer's, where this is happening at a much younger age, or, for example, in a trauma-induced dementia in younger people?
Yeah. Anybody who's worked with people with dementia knows a person with dementia is one person with dementia. It's absolutely different in every case. We used to say people with MCI who were getting diagnosed in their 50s had a quicker trajectory. That's not the case anymore. We're seeing now people who have early onset, but living 20 years with that. So I think you have to realize one person is one person. So back to the personalized idea, there's a lot of variability in here with dementia. And so you can't say that, for sure, one way or the other. Yeah.
Okay, I don't have any more questions online.
Sure.
Nope, no more questions online. So we have a reception after for those who attended in person. So Heather will be available, and you can ask some more questions if you didn't want to do it in the audience format. But if everybody would like to join me in thanking Heather for her talk today.
Thank you.
And thank you to everybody online who attended. That was great that you logged in and you got to avoid going out in the snow.